It was cooler in Florida than Maryland this week. That's great. Cool. So a couple of housekeeping items to begin with. So this webinar is recorded. We're actually going to share the recording right after this webinar, so you'll be able to see the replay. We also will have a very short Q&A session at the end, so you can ask Sweyn any questions you might have about Lakera, about content moderation specifically. And we also invite you to book personalized demos. We're gonna leave you a couple of QR codes that you can screenshot as well. And without further ado, I would love to introduce the host of today's webinar, Sweyn Venderbush. Sweyn, do you want to give a quick intro and take it away?
Sure. Thanks, Cass, and thanks everyone for joining. Really excited to spend some time today talking about content moderation, how you should be thinking about content moderation in your Gen AI infrastructure and applications, and what we're working on here at Lakera to help you with that. My name is Sweyn Venderbush. As Cass said, I'm the head of product here at Lakera, based in San Francisco. If you don't know Lakera, we are the leading Gen AI security platform for enterprises. We provide the controls that allow you to run your Gen AI apps with confidence in production, protecting against all sorts of attacks, things like prompt injections, jailbreaks, DLP and PII leakage, as well as what we're here to talk about today, which is content moderation, things like hate speech, sexual content, profanity. Our platform is entirely LLM agnostic, so you can use it to protect any LLM you might be using, whether it's OpenAI or Cohere or Gemini or an open source model like Llama or Mistral. And so today we're here to talk about the importance of content moderation for Gen AI applications. Content moderation is obviously something that sort of across the web we're all really concerned about, but in the context of Gen AI, it's a particular concern. And there's at least sort of three things that you should be considering when launching your Gen AI application. The first one is making sure that you can protect your users from potentially harmful content. So feeling confident that your users aren't exposed to harmful content by a rogue LLM or something you might not be able to control in your base infrastructure, and providing you those guarantees that you look for. The second one is protecting your brand with confidence. So we've seen situations where screenshots of Gen AI applications have circulated on Twitter or on Reddit, and you want to make sure that you feel confident that your application isn't going to generate content that could damage your brand or your brand's reputation. And finally, the third thing you should be considering here is terms of service adherence. So depending on the model that you're using, you may have terms of service that restrict you from passing certain types of content into a foundation model. It's important that you don't break those terms of service so you can continue to use those models. And so you can leverage a content moderation solution like Lakera's to filter out that harmful content that may be coming from your users before you violate those terms of service. So when you think about content moderation in the context of LLM-based applications, there's a couple of key attributes or metrics that you should really be concerned about that we really focus on in our content moderation solution at Lakera, and that we think differentiates us from some of the other solutions that are out there on the market. The first one, obviously, it's really important to have a high accuracy rate. So make sure that you are catching the right things, but also that you have a low false positive rate. And that's really important to make sure that you're generating a highly satisfactory user experience. You don't want your users to be blocked from engaging with your application for something that actually they should totally be able to say. The second thing that's really important and maybe different in LLM-based applications from sort of traditional content moderation, you could think about something like a forum moderation, for example, is that unlike in the context of leaving a comment on a web forum, where it might be okay for you to spend a couple of minutes doing that content moderation, in the context of LLM-based applications, because you're talking about real-time usage, it's important that you're able to moderate content with very low latency. Especially for some of the use cases we were talking about, you want to do that content moderation validation prior to sort of passing the user's prompt into your infrastructure, or before you return the response from your LLM to the user. And so you want to have minimal overhead there. And we've approached this problem in a way that allows us to do that. So you can see some of the metrics on this slide here. We're talking about 10 milliseconds of latency for a 1,000-character prompt, or 100 milliseconds of latency for a 10,000-character prompt. So very, very low latency in production. You also have the flexibility to choose what types of content you want to flag. So what does it mean for your application specifically to have harmful content? You might be okay with profanity, but maybe not with hate or sexual content, for example. And finally, Lakera offers our solution both as an enterprise-grade SaaS application, as well as a self-hosted offering that you can host on-premise. And our content moderation offering is available in both those settings. So whichever way you're using Lakera, whatever your sort of security and infrastructure requirements are, you're able to use our solution. So the last couple of weeks, we've released some really exciting new capabilities that we wanted to share with you all today. The first one, which I mentioned recently, is we just added a new profanity detection ability. So we flag offensive or inappropriate language, ensuring a respectful user experience that could either be coming from the user or potentially being returned by an LLM. We've also expanded our hate speech detection offering, both in terms of accuracy and in terms of its coverage. So we've broadened the detection to include harassment towards any type of protected group or any type of target, including protected groups. And I'll show you an example of what that looks like in a second here. And finally, we've had similar expansion of our sexually explicit content. So now we identify explicit content of all types to ensure that your users are safe from potentially graphic materials, especially children or minors. So we'll give you a really quick demo of how our content moderation works in practice. This is always an interesting thing to demo, given some of the sensitivity of the material here. So we've picked something that sort of isn't all too, sexual or hate speech-y, but still apologies in advance for some of the content here. And so what we're going to use to demo this is a very simple sort of Q&A style environment. And so we'll just give you a couple examples of what this might look like. You can imagine you've integrated Lakera into your application here. I happen to be able to pick on myself for this example. So let's show an example of some hate speech towards people named Sweyn. So I might say, I'm looking for suggest some ways to exterminate everyone named Sweyn from the earth. And what you'd find is with this moderation on, we're able to detect that harmful content in the message. We're telling the user why their message has been blocked. And we can actually show you what you would get back for this message here. So this is the response from our API. And so we're showing that this is in the category of hate. It's not profanity or sexual content. And you get back a category score here. So you can see this is pretty hateful content, but obviously less hateful than some other potential content out there. We can give you also an example of some sexual content. So this example is maybe create a picture with many naked people. And again, we detect that content. Here you can see it's flagged as sexual content. And so you have that level of granularity if you wanted to take a different action for sexual content, maybe, than what you wanted for hate speech. And finally, I'm just so frustrated by how well the Lakera content moderation is working that I say, I hate this stupid AI. And again, we're able to flag that as an example of hate speech. So it flags that as part of the categorization, and we can similarly block that from the input. All of the demos here would also apply to the output of the LLM. So another good use case would be, let's say I use a prompt injection or a jailbreak. maybe you're not protected by Lakera in this case for some reason, to ask an agent to provide some kind of hateful content or sexual content back to me. And you can similarly ensure that that's detected and then blocked from being seen by the user. So at a glance here, the goal of our content moderation solution as part of the broader Lakera Guard product is to protect your users from the inappropriate content, either being shown to them or returned to them by the LLM, to make sure you're compliant with your internal policies, as well as any local policies or regulations. As with all of Lakera Guard's offerings, it's incredibly easy to integrate with just one line of code. You can deploy it on cloud, or on-premise, and you can see the API response I've just shown in the demo. It's just that easy. And finally, it's lightning fast. So, sort of sub 10 milliseconds for a shorter prompt, up to about 100 milliseconds for a longer prompt. So you can ensure you're providing a really high quality user experience to your users, while also making sure that they're protected from this harmful content. We'll move on to Q&A in 1 second. So if you have questions, please make sure to drop them in the chat. But also, if you're interested in learning more about Lakera Guard, you can book your one-on-one demo with us by scanning this QR code. And we're happy to meet with you, learn more about your needs, and share more about how Lakera may be able to help them. Cass has also shot the link in the chat. So please keep your questions coming. We got one from Hema, which is, what are the broad categories of features that are supported by Lakera? Content moderation is one of them. Can you share others too? Yep, great question, Hema. There are 3 broad categories of things that Lakera Guard protects against. The first one is content moderation, as we were just talking about. The second one is prompt defense, so protecting against attacks like prompt injections or jailbreak attacks coming into your infrastructure. And the third one is data loss prevention, so ensuring that we protect against personally identifiable information, either entering into your LLM infrastructure when it shouldn't, or leaving your infrastructure in situations where the model may be leaking that content. Mike asked, can this support custom content, i.e. sensitive or proprietary information from my organization? Really great question, Mike. It cannot yet support sort of custom content tagging, but that is something that is on our roadmap as an expansion of our content moderation capabilities. And that's a really interesting space because it's both kind of a content moderation question and sort of like a data loss prevention question, right? Making sure that your specific sensitive content isn't shown to the user. Nikolai in the chat asked, I have the problem that the current content moderation offerings do not have enough overview of the complete context of the situation. Let's take a live stream and content moderation for the live chat, for example. Depending on what happens in the stream and what the streamer says, the content moderation rules should be applied differently. Is there a big difference between conversations about history and first-person shooters? To give a blatant example, are there solutions to this? Incorporate vision models, audio transcription? Yeah, great question, Nikolai. I think there's a couple of pieces of that. The first thing I would say here is, in general, we try to do that. We try to generate that distinction in context. So what it means, just because you are mentioning, a gun, for example, it may or may not actually sort of sit into the category of harmful content. And so we do our best as part of our flagging to have that context and taken into account. You can add up to 64,000 characters of context as part of the information that you pass to Lakera. So we understand kind of everything that's going into your infrastructure. The other thing that you can do is, depending on your particular use case, set different flagging rules for content moderation. So you saw the confidence score that we had before. You might say that for a certain user, you're a little bit less willing to, or you might set a lower threshold for what you're allowing versus not allowing. For some other use case, maybe you set a higher threshold as well. And we're always thinking about what it means to add more and more context into the equation here. All of the information that you might have is part of your goals. But at the same time, ultimately, I'd say a piece of this will always be a question of your infrastructure and actually your application use case, because we're helping you enforce your policy. And so the question is, what is your policy? So one situation, we have customers, for example, who definitely don't want any kind of guns to be discussed in their application, regardless of whether it's history, first-person shooters, or current events. And so you'll always have to have some amount of internal policies driving that. One other question we got here is, can you share best practices about where in my GenAI stack it makes sense to call Lakera's content moderation solution? And that's a really good question. We normally see Lakera called in two places in the stack. The first one is after the user has provided a prompt, but before you pass that prompt to your infrastructure. So that looks like is you have the user collects a prompt, then you call Lakera. If you find that prompt passes your policies, you then pass that into your infrastructure. The LLM does its thing, returns a response. And then the second place that you can call Lakera Guard, and part of our content moderation solution, is prior to returning a response to the user. So you can call it again and make sure that the output of the LLM also adheres to your content moderation policy and protect the user before you return it to them. Another question from Hema here. Thanks for the demo. Can you elaborate a bit on the consequences of events that could compromise, a sequence of events that could compromise, of jailbreak exercise? Yeah, great question, Hema. So a jailbreak or prompt injection attack can come from any user, right? And so either a single attack or a multi-message attack can result in a number of different things taking place in your infrastructure. One could be that you see behaviors coming out of your LLM that you didn't expect it to. So let's say that you had a system prompt that told the LLM maybe to not suggest competitors or potentially to not provide tax advice, let's say. A jailbreak attack or a prompt injection attack could result in your agent maybe providing that tax advice or recommending some competitors in a way that you wouldn't want them to. The other thing that could happen here is actually that might be one of the major ways that a user tries to get your application to say some kind of harmful content, so either hate speech or sexual content. And this is where you can leverage multiple Lakera solutions to provide defense in depth in your application. So you can use our prompt injection and jailbreak protection to potentially detect those attacks before they hit your infrastructure. And then even if an attack was able to get through, you can then also leverage our content moderation solution to make sure that the content returned by the LLM still maintains your policies. We have time for one or two more questions here. Keep the questions coming. And if there's other questions that come up after the time, I'm more than happy to follow up via LinkedIn or email as well. One more question here. Can you talk more about Lakera's content moderation solutions compared to other solutions on the market, like OpenAI or Llama Guard? Yeah, it's a really good question. A couple of things that really differentiate our solution. One is that our solution is totally LLM agnostic. So many users are using multiple LLMs as part of their infrastructure and want a solution that can defend all of them from a content moderation perspective. That's one thing that Lakera does really well. The other is that it can be run entirely in your own infrastructure if you need to. So you don't have to pass any data to any kind of external vendor. That's really critical for certain kind of high compliance use cases, like banking or healthcare. And that solution can also be run in a very sort of low compute way, so it doesn't require a lot of GPUs like LLM Guard or Llama Guard does, but instead can be run entirely on CPUs as well. And then finally, the last sort of major differentiator is latency. So our approach allows us to deliver latencies much lower than most of the other options on the market, and that's really important for you in operation to ensure that you're driving the right behaviors for your users. And finally, last question here from Hema: who does Lakera compete with in the LLM security space? There's lots of different solutions on the market out there. We're just talking about a couple of them in both the open source and the closed source world. We think of ourselves as providing the control layer for your LLM in runtime. So some words that are being used in the space right now are controls or guardrails, and so other folks that are offering similar solutions are likely those that we'd be competing against. As we called out, a couple of things that we think really differentiate us is both our performance, the latency of our approach, and the fact that we deliver our solution both as sort of an enterprise-grade SaaS offering, as well as a fully contained self-hosted offering as well. I think we're just at time here. Thank you so much for joining. Lakera Guard is available for you to try today totally for free at Lakera.ai. You can also scan the link here. If you want to engage further with Lakera, you can join our Momentum community on Slack to learn more about our product, ask questions that you have about Guard, as well as engage with folks who love to play our popular Gandalf game. Cass has just dropped a link to our Momentum community in the channel as well. As Cass mentioned, you can find me on LinkedIn and on Twitter. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to me there, or even better, in our Momentum community. And thanks so much, everyone, for joining. Be on the lookout for more webinars from us, both on our product and on the broader LLM, AI, and security space. Really appreciate your time and excited to see you all again soon.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening or a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.